Have you ever stopped to think about the power in the words you speak every day? Not the big, profound things you say in special moments, but the simple ones that slip out without you even noticing. This is never going to work, my life is a mess, nothing ever changes for me. Those words, as harmless as they might seem, are seeds you're planting in the soil of your life. A lot of times, we think we're just venting, being realistic, expressing how we feel. But in reality, we're building invisible walls around ourselves, trapping us in a cycle of negativity. The mouth speaks what the heart is full of, and the heart feeds on what we choose to believe and repeat. If you plant words of complaint, you'll reap frustration. If you sow discouragement, you'll harvest stagnation. But if you start, even in the middle of your struggles, declaring words of faith, hope, and life, something starts to shift. Not because everything around you instantly changes, but because you begin to see through eyes of faith, and that changes everything. The Bible reminds us that life and death are in the power of the tongue. What you say can lift someone up, heal wounds, and open doors. But it can also crush dreams, hurt hearts, and close off possibilities. This video is an invitation. What if you started paying more attention to the words you speak? They don't just vanish into thin air. They create an atmosphere. They prepare the soil for the life you'll live tomorrow. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories that speak to the heart and awaken the soul, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Every story here has a purpose, to remind you that there's always a path to faith, healing, and new beginnings. So, are we in this together? Stick with me, because the story of Elijah is going to show you, in a real and powerful way, how changing your words can change your life. In the small town of São Clemente, where mornings began with birdsong and the smell of fresh coffee drifted down the sidewalks, lived a man named Elias. He was a gardener. For over 20 years, he had cared for the neighborhood's backyards with calloused hands and a face that bore the weight of many lost springs. Elias knew every flower by name. He knew the perfect time to prune, just how much to water, and how to care for the roots. But despite being surrounded daily by nature's beauty, his heart had become dry soil. What came out of his mouth, day after day, was a steady stream of sorrow. Nothing ever goes right in this life. Things always fall apart when it's up to me. God forgot about me a long time ago. These phrases had become his daily companions. He'd say he wasn't trying to complain, it was just the truth of life. The neighbors had gotten used to it, and with half smiles, they'd joke that Elias was great with a shovel, but hopeless with hope. And the truth is, Elias had every reason to feel broken. He'd lost his wife years ago. He'd grown distant from his only son. His health wasn't what it used to be. Each scar held a pain that, instead of being surrendered to God, was thrown back into the world as complaints. Even surrounded by flowers, Elias couldn't see any color. Even with life blooming all around him, all he could see was loss. It was like he was watering a garden of despair inside himself, with his own words. But what Elias didn't know was that God had already begun preparing the soil for something new. Something that would begin with a simple conversation, in the most ordinary place, carrying a seed that could change everything. The next morning, Elias left the house a bit earlier than usual. The sky was clear, and the gentle breeze carried a kind of freshness he hadn't noticed in a long time. As always, he was heading toward Dona Nair's house, where he tended a garden full of daisies and rosemary. But something made him stop. In the town's central square, there was a man Elias had never noticed before. Sitting on a wooden bench beneath the shade of a large tree, the man was talking to flowers. Elias frowned and slowly walked closer, part curious, part skeptical. The old man seemed to smile as he gently touched the petals of a small pot of sunflowers. "You talk to flowers?" Elias asked, a hint of mockery in his voice. The man, who looked to be around 80, lifted his eyes calmly and replied, "I do. They listen. They feel. They respond." Elias chuckled, but there was something about the scene that kept him from walking away. Before he even realized it, he sat down beside the man. The old man went on. "Life is a lot like a garden, my friend. Everything you say, you plant. If all you do is complain, all you'll harvest is thorns. But if you learn to bless with your words, even deserts will bloom." Elias went quiet for a few moments. Suddenly, he felt exposed, like the man had seen straight into his soul with a single sentence. "But how do you even do that?" Elias asked. "How do you change a whole lifetime of complaining?" The old man smiled, eyes shining with peace. "You start small. Trade one complaint for a thank you. One fear for a promise. One grumble for a declaration of hope. Do it every day, until your mouth gets used to speaking what you want to live, not what you're afraid of." The stranger's words echoed deep inside Elias. He said goodbye, still a bit confused, but with a strange stirring in his heart. For the first time in a long while, he found himself wondering, what if it was true? What if everything in his life was the way it was, because of the words he'd been speaking? If you're just tuning in, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. There are plenty more stories coming your way. Stories that touch, transform, and strengthen the soul. And now, let's keep going, because Elias is about to take the most important step of his life. That night, Elias could hardly sleep. The old man's words from the square kept replaying in his mind like a chorus he couldn't quiet. He'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering, do my words really have that kind of power? The next morning, as he sipped his usual black coffee, bitter like his thoughts had always been, he did something different. Before complaining about his aching back, his tight schedule, or his hard life, he took a deep breath and said, "Today is going to be a good day." It felt strange. It sounded fake. But he said it. And he kept going. "I'm thankful for my job. Thankful for this bread on the table. Thankful for one more day of life." The words felt small, almost forced. But they were seeds. And Elias, without even realizing it, was beginning to replant his own heart. Throughout the day, he tried to keep it up. When he picked up his hoe, instead of grumbling, he whispered, "God, give me strength." When he saw an overgrown, neglected garden, instead of criticizing it, he said, "Something beautiful is going to grow here." The neighbors noticed. Don in there even asked if he was feeling sick. But Elias just smiled. For the first time in years, he realized that peace didn't come from what changed on the outside, but from what was starting to shift inside. In the days that followed, he kept going. He still slipped up sometimes. Complaints would sneak out, like an old reflex hard to break. But every time he caught himself, he'd replace the negativity with a word of blessing. "God is with me. All things work together for good. I believe better days are coming." And those words began to do something Elias never expected. They started to heal him. Little by little, he found himself smiling more easily, talking with clients more warmly, looking at the flowers with fresh eyes. It was as if changing the words from his mouth was renewing his soul. It wasn't magic. It was faith in action. And like any seed, it would take time, patience, and persistence. But the gardener who once mumbled complaints was now speaking life. And that was about to make room for miracles he never saw coming. Time went on. Days turned into weeks, and Elias kept up with his new habit. He still woke up early, still worked the same gardens, still felt the same aches in his body. But now, something had changed, quietly, deeply, the way he saw life. The first thing he noticed was how people started reacting to him. Before, clients would greet him with polite distance, like they weren't in the mood for conversation. Now, they welcomed him with genuine smiles. Some even invited him in for coffee after work. He didn't fully understand why, but the truth was, his presence no longer carried the heaviness it once did. He was lighter, more alive. And then came the small miracles. One day, while tending Donna Estella's backyard, she said, "Mr. Elias, I don't know what you've been doing with these plants, but they've never bloomed like this before." Elias looked at the flowers and felt a lump rise in his throat. Same hands, same soil, same fertilizer. But now, watered with words of faith and hope, they seemed to respond differently, as if life itself was more willing to bloom. And it didn't stop with the plants. His health, once fragile, started to improve. His nights, once filled with insomnia and heavy thoughts, were now peaceful and calm. Sometimes he'd wake up in the middle of the night, and instead of groaning, he'd whisper, "Thank you, Lord, for another day." But maybe the clearest sign that Elias's inner garden was truly blossoming came one ordinary morning, when he passed by the square where he'd first met the wise old man. The bench was empty. Elias sat there for a while, gazing at the flowers the old man had once tended so lovingly. And then, without realizing it, he began to speak to them too. "You're looking beautiful today. Keep growing. God's taking care of us, isn't he?" In that moment, Elias finally understood what the old man had meant from the start. Words aren't just sounds. They're seeds. And what you speak, you live. And if even flowers can respond to words spoken with love, imagine what God can do with a heart that chooses to speak blessing instead of bitterness. Elias still had challenges. Life still brought struggles. But now he had a secret. A path. A whole new way to live. It was a cloudy afternoon when Elias received the visitor he least expected. He was tending to his own garden, a small space behind the house that, over the past few months, had become his sanctuary. The flowers there seemed to understand his soul. With every new plant he placed in the soil, it felt like he was slowly rebuilding pieces of himself. As he watered a lavender bush, he heard a sound coming from the front gate. It was rare for him to get visitors. Most people only saw him while he was working. With slow, steady steps, Elias walked to the gate, having no idea he was about to experience the most profound moment of his new journey. When he opened the gate, his heart stopped for a second. It was Matthias, his son. Years had passed, and the distance between them had grown into what felt like an unbridgeable gap. Ever since his wife's death, a bitter argument had torn them apart. Harsh words were exchanged. Long silences became walls. And though Elias missed him every single day, he never found the courage to reach out. But now, here he was. Head down. Hands trembling. Like someone who carried an abandoned garden inside his own heart. "Dad," Matthias said, his voice tight with emotion. Elias felt his eyes well up. For a moment, the old reflex kicked in, the urge to remember the pain, the silence, the wounds. But something else rose up in his chest. A word. Son. I'm so glad you're here. There were no speeches. No explanations. Just an embrace. One of those long, quiet hugs that says more than words ever could. They sat together in the backyard. Matthias shared stories of the years apart, the mistakes, the fears, and the ache he never stopped feeling. Elias listened closely. And when his son finished, Elias spoke through a tight throat. I made mistakes too, son. I spent too long complaining about life, including you. But God has taught me that words have power. And today, I choose to say, you are welcome. You are loved. You are a part of me. And right there, surrounded by flowers and tears, God performed the greatest miracle of Elias's life. It wasn't healing in his body, or a new job opening. It was a miracle in his heart. A reunion made possible because, one day, he chose to trade complaint for faith. The heaviness for peace. The bitterness for words that restore. The days that followed Elias and Matthias' reunion were filled with rediscovery. Father and son now walked side by side, not just in the home they once shared, but in a new understanding of love, forgiveness, and purpose. Moved by his father's transformation, Matthias decided to stay for a while. He started helping with the gardens and quickly noticed something different about the way Elias treated each plant, each customer, each detail. It wasn't just the work of a gardener, it was the care of someone who had come to understand that everything alive responds to how it's treated, even people. One day, while they were tending a yard full of sunflowers, Matthias asked, Dad, what happened to you? How did you change so much? Elias, with his straw hat casting a shadow over his face, smiled and replied, I stopped complaining and started speaking life into what I wanted to see. At first, it felt silly. But that's what God used to heal me from the inside out. When I changed my words, He started changing my story. Elias's words no longer carried the weight of the past. Now, they were seeds of faith, sown with hope for the future. People in town began to know him not just as the man who talked to plants, but as someone who knew how to listen to people's hearts. Many sought him out not just for his hands, but for his voice. A voice that now uplifted, encouraged, and brought peace. His own garden, once neglected, had been transformed. It became the most beautiful one in the village, not just because of the flowers, but because of the peace that lingered in the air. It wasn't unusual to see people stopping by to take pictures, sit under the tree, or simply soak in a moment of stillness. There was something there that couldn't be explained, only felt. Elias now began each day by saying, Today will be a day of peace. I'm thankful to be alive. My past is healed. My present is light. And my future is in God's hands. This was his new daily liturgy. Not out of superstition, but out of conviction. And now, before we end this story, I want to offer you an invitation. If you've made it this far and something inside you is stirred, maybe it's time to look at the words you've been speaking. What have you been declaring over your life? Over your family? Over your future? Be like Elias. Trade complaints for faith. Criticism for gratitude. Discouragement for hope. Start small. One word a day. One seed. And trust this, God is an expert at making even the driest soil bloom. And if you want to keep hearing stories like this, stories that warm the heart and awaken the soul, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Here, every story is a reminder that faith can transform anything, even you. May God bless you, and may the words of your mouth become, from this day on, the beginning of a brand new life.